Hello, my singing friends. Welcome back to my channel. How is everybody doing in this crazy, crazy time? We are all good, thank goodness. Knock on wood, we are all healthy. I am in kind of the epicenter geographically of what's happening in the US, which is a little bit freaky. Not gonna lie, we are in Tenafly, New Jersey, which is in Bergen County, which is the hardest hit county in all of New Jersey. And then my parents are in New York City, and they're pretty much ground zero for case numbers right now in the US, although other places are climbing quickly, including New Orleans, which is my other favorite city in the US after New York. But my parents are healthy, and we're just kind of keeping our eye on the news. Today, Trump was talking about potentially quarantining New Jersey and New York, which means that I would not be able to travel to see my parents until he decides that it's okay. So that is definitely freaking me out. But of course, I realize that there are plenty of people that have it a lot worse than I do, especially the healthcare workers that are on the front line of all of this. And I'm incredibly grateful to them. And of course, the essential workers who are putting themselves in danger every single day, including the supermarket workers and janitors, cleaning people that are coming into contact with this virus, whether they want to or not, and don't have the luxury of sheltering at home like we do. So I wanted to make a video for all of you to kind of take our minds off of what's happening in the news. And music and singing has always been something that's been very therapeutic and cathartic for me. So a question that I get asked a lot is, how do I improve the tone of my singing voice? And I wanted to address that in this video. Tone is kind of this pseudo-scientific technical word that gets thrown around a lot and can mean a lot of things, but I like to think about it as like the flavor of your voice. So if you are doing everything technically perfectly, you have a great sense of pitch and you're singing without any problems, but the tone of your voice is not pleasing, people are not going to want to listen to you sing. And one thing that really affects your tone is your physicality. And I've talked about this a lot in my other videos, but the voice is unique in that we all have different bodies and our voice is inside of our body. So depending on the length of your vocal tract and the capacity of your lungs and all of these different factors, your voice is going to sound different than anybody else's on the planet. And that is an incredibly beautiful thing. You know, we're all like snowflakes and everybody's voice is unique. But the fact that we're not all an instrument that comes out of a factory and we're not going to sound exactly the same way means that there's a limitation to what you can do to improve the tone of your voice. That being said, there are some general principles that can really help you. And, you know, one thing that I think is helpful in organizing the way that we think about tone is to break it up in terms of singing genres. So if you are singing in a more bluesy, jazzy genre, you're gonna wanna have a darker, more back-placed tone. You want your sound to kind of come from low in your body and your resonance to be low-placed and all of your singing apparatus to be very, very open. And if you're singing more with a classical tone, you want your tone to be more high-placed and back-placed. So high and far back, you know, when you're singing, ah, that's kind of back here, as opposed to bluesy jazzy is more, ah, down here. If you want to sing with more of a pop tone or a rock tone, that's going to be more neutral. Pop can be a little bit more forward-placed and bright. And then if you get into the realm of musical theater, that tends to be much more brassy and bright and nasal and front-placed in your mask. So those are just it's one way of thinking about how your tone can change as you're moving from genre to genre. And most people are gonna have genres that they're drawn to, but also genres that their voices are more suited for. But of course, that shouldn't discourage you from pursuing a tone that matches the genre that you have a passion for. So now that we've laid that groundwork, I'm going to give you a couple of exercises that I think are going to open up some of the options for you in terms of what is available to you. The first exercise that we're going to do today, I like to call the didgeridoo. And as you know, if you've been following my channel, I was recently in Sydney, Australia, and the didgeridoo is an Aboriginal instrument that looks like a really long elephant trunk. And when you play this instrument, it produces this really cool low drone. So what we're gonna do in this exercise is we are gonna play around with a neutral tone with resonance placed in our mouth and a front placed tone with our resonance more in our mask or our nasopharynx, and a back placed tone more in the back of our throat. So we're gonna take any tone that's in your comfortable chest voice range. I'm gonna pick an E above middle C, and we're just gonna sing on ah. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna imagine that there's a tiny little Christmas light, and I'm holding it in the center of my mouth, or a firefly that's less denominational. So imagine you've got this little firefly in the center of your mouth. Ah, my resonance is right there in my mouth. And now I'm just gonna move it mentally forward and back. So first I'm gonna move it into my nose or my nasopharynx. Ah. So as you can see, my tone is getting more narrow and it is getting more nasal and bright as I'm pushing the sound forward into my mask. And the way that I'm achieving this is I'm raising my tongue and I'm flattening and compressing the resonant space between my tongue and my soft palate. So I'm closing that area. Now I'm gonna move that little firefly back into my mouth, and then I'm gonna swallow it back into my throat. I'm imagining that I'm swallowing this firefly, like I'm swallowing a pill. So I'm gonna bring the sound down into my throat. You can hear that the sound becomes a lot darker and more bluesy and rich and fat when I swallow it back. So now let's practice just pinging that sound from the neutral position to our front placed bright nasopharynx position, back to neutral, and then back into our throat, into that very back placed sound, okay? So you can probably guess why I call this exercise the didgeridoo, because it really sounds like a drone, right? You're getting this really interesting kind of Doppler effect as the sound is moving around inside of our mouth. And we're simply mentally moving around the resonance from neutral to front placed to neutral to back placed. And you can hear how that really changes the tone of our voice without anything else changing. The pitch is remaining the same. The amount of compression and breath support and power to the sound is remaining the same. I'm not changing my breathiness. My sound is still very strong and connected. I'm still leaning into that sound. I'm simply changing where I'm imagining that resonance hitting, and it's really changing the flavor of my voice or the quality of my tone. So we just talked about this horizontal dimension, right? We started neutral in the middle of our face. We moved our tone forward into our bright kind of nasopharynx mask area, and then we swallowed it back into our more bluesy, dark sound. We can also move in a vertical dimension. So we can be neutral kind of in the middle, but we can also move our sound up. And that becomes more of like a classical sound. So when you hear an opera singer, they're back placed, but they're high, as opposed to back placed and low, which is more bluesy. So if you're here, that's low, neutral, that's more classical and high. So you can also change your tone, kind of moving it vertically, but back placed, right? And you can be high, and move it forward and become much more piercing and bright and brassy. Another thing to think about in terms of tone is how rich and full your resonance sounds versus being very pinched and small. So if you compress your resonant space by bringing down your soft palate and bringing up your tongue, you can get this very shrill kind of Muppety sound, like that kind of sound. Like people often compare Shakira to having that like very Muppety kind of closed off sound. And that's the opposite of having a very open kind of rich resonant sound, where you really get that nice full ping. And that's where you're setting all of your singing apparatus in the optimal open position. And I've talked about this in other videos, but that basically means raising your soft palate, lowering your tongue, opening your throat, and really maximizing that resonant space. So you can have a very rich, full, round, resonant tone or a more pinched, brassy, cutting tone. But sometimes you want that because that sound can really cut through a room and give you a lot of volume, especially when you're singing up in your high head voice. And that's where we talk about getting like twang or being nasally, being in your nasopharynx, that kind of thing. I think it's helpful to think about exemplars of these various different kinds of tonal qualities, because I think that makes it a lot more concrete than just talking in these vague terms. So when I think about a very bright kind of musical theater voice, I think of Idina Menzel or Kristen Chenoweth. When I think about more belty, rich, sonorous, powerful voices, I think of like Adele or Lady Gaga or Demi Lovato, that kind of a voice, or like a Kelly Clarkson. When I think about more neutral pop voices, I think about Katy Perry or Taylor Swift. When I think about more pinched or crying kind of tonalities, that I think about like Sia or Shakira or Halsey, or I'm neglecting all of the men of the world, like Matt Bellamy from Muse or Tom York or Adam Levine from Maroon 5. And the opposite of that would be the more relaxed, kind of open crooner type of singer, like the Michael Bublés of the world. When I think about having a more twangy type of tone, I think about Miley Cyrus or Sheryl Crow. And we haven't even talked about breathiness versus a connected tone. And of course, Billie Eilish is the queen of having that really breathy, kind of gentle sounding tone, that really light attack. So let's actually do an exercise to play with the poles of being connected and being breathy. And when I say being breathy, I mean your chords are just coming together very lightly and you're hearing the air coming between them, that aspiration, that hiss. So you can just take a scale and sing on like uh-oh, very, very staccato, and that's gonna make sure that your chords are very adducted and you're getting a very connected tone. And now try doing the same thing, but add an H in front of each note. And you can even make that staccato. Right? And then you really get that nice, breathy, gentle tone. So as you can see, tone is kind of this bucket term that encompasses a lot of things in singing. But hopefully these couple of exercises gave you a glimpse into what is really possible and what you can do with your voice, even given your own physical limitations. So, you know, the number one thing to becoming a good singer, in my view, is to just play around and experiment and try crazy things with your voice. Try making all kinds of crazy sounds and doing all these different crazy exercises, and just don't be inhibited. And you may stumble upon a happy accident and discover that you can do things with your voice that you never dreamed possible. And it'll keep you entertained while we're all trapped in our houses. Please let me know in the comments below a couple of adjectives that you would use to describe your unique voice, and maybe one or two singers that you think have similar tonal qualities. If you enjoyed this video, please hit subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you here next week, provided that the world doesn't end. Until then, happy singing.